Howdy, all you delicious people. Currently, because I'm fusing clips together, there's going to be another introduction here in a couple minutes here. I just wanted everybody to know. Currently, this movie is available on Tubi right now. TUBI. Really, I forgot about that when I went on and did this review. So I'm saying that now, so you can go ahead and check that out on TUBI, Tubi. So you can go on and see this movie for absolutely free because that's where it's currently, to the second this recording, available right now for you to see. So transition to, of course, the review. Bye, everybody. Howdy, all of you delicious people. I'm here today to review Birdman, or The Unexpected Virtue of Ignorance, whatever that means. That's not the actual title, whatever that means, but I'm like, what? It's kind of funny at the very end of the movie, they kind of slap this title on some newspaper. So, Birdman. I think a lot of people, when this movie came out, they're like, oh my god, Michael Keaton's back, yeah! And everybody was so excited. And a lot of people were immediately thinking, like, oh, this is going to be some superhero movie, and he's playing some Birdman character, this looks interesting. What is this about? And then all of a sudden they realized that it was some theater movie, and they're like, what? Say what now? Like, I was expecting, like, Keaton, like, Superman in it up and whatever, and what? And I didn't get that. No. Really, it's, like, there's so much about this movie that it's kind of, like, art imitating life for this film. And that's the thing that I kind of find so fascinating about this. Where, of course, we have Michael Keaton's character, Regan, who is to be a previous comic book heroed, movied, franchised character, and come and turn around, and we have Regan, who is to be Michael Keaton, who Michael Keaton had, of course, gone on and been Batman for 2 movies, and then he, of course, went on and did other things. And so a lot of people would go on and whisper, like, hey, you're my favorite Batman, you're my best Batman. Like, hey, are you ever going to go on and be Batman again? Because everybody has that question. Like, anybody who is to ever go on and be a superhero at some point or another, they're like, hey, man, are you ever going to dust off those tights yet again and give us one more go? And usually the character's just like, well, my phone's right there. Like, yeah, sure, why not? Like, hey, like, I could still go. Like, I'm in good shape, and so on and so. Like, we have these characters that go on and, like, have that just kind of, like, thing affect their psyche. So, because really, everybody will know, of course, somebody by their previous work and not something that is to be the newest, latest thing that they're doing. And that's kind of sad. So, going into this movie, the movie really focuses on this theater play. And I know a lot of people might have been disappointed about that, and they're just like, hey, like, I wanted to see more of, like, the Birdman backstory kind of thing, but we didn't get that. Really, I just was fascinated by how kind of, like, Regan is getting to the point of being burnt out, and in just so, like, desperation to just have, like, just something work and be perfect and be the way that he wants it to be, that it's like pushing him into almost insanity at some point. And that's the thing that I really like about this film, I enjoy about this film. So to just be so burnt out that you're just like, Rrr! So for a lot of people that might be interested in, like, a theater film, There was this one Topher Grace film called Opening Night that's kind of like this interesting, like, desperation of having Topher Grace's character trying to keep everything together backstage and try to go on and figure out all these kind of, excuse me, these ways of which to, like, save whatever this show is for that night and that night only. So, and we also have, like, Phantom the Opera, which is just a really cool musical piece that has really enjoyable music inside of it. But anyways, so Birdman. What exactly is this film about besides what I just said? So, we of course have this play that is going on, and we're finding a number of these actors that are just to be pieces of work. Just really just interesting characters who have all their, like, their little things that they are to go on and have and be a part of in this thing. We have a moment between both Emma Stone and Michael Keaton's characters where we consistently have it where Sam is talking to Regan and telling him, hey, like, you need to have a social media presence. Like, how do you expect anybody to come to your theater if they don't really even know you exist? Because this is how we do it now. And so Regan is just like, well, like, why do I even need a social media presence? But, like, things continue to go viral for this theater, which of course is to push, of course, our characters to go on and just like, well, like, I guess it's right. Like, I guess we should have some kind of presence, and to go on and realize that, like, all of a sudden these things are going on the internet, and it's just helping out our play and helping out us eventually getting the money, or get people interested on something they might not have been interested before because all of a sudden they're seeing this viral video being put together. So, with that said, and we also have Birdman, who is a figment of Reagan's imagination, whispering sweet nothings to him, tempting him and teasing him to go on and fly, or be the guy, of course, that is to go on and be so tempted to just don on the suit one more time. Regan is to also go on and have these special abilities, these powers of sorts, that are to have us in our minds thinking, is this guy actually being able to have these powers, or is it just him just kind of losing his sanity yet again? Is he really being able to have these psychic abilities where he's all of a sudden floating, or breaking lights, or having the ability to just kind of turn off his radio just by a twist of the wrist? A lot of people could have, like, kind of this back and forthing of really just thinking like, no, like, I think all of this is really happening, or I think all of this is just in Regan's head. So that could be an interesting debate. Uh, but yeah, like, I can't, like, for the life of me, I can't probably really think that Regan is actually flying, like, for this story. I would probably have to think that everything is probably in his head. Like, he's thinking that he's doing this, but actually, it's not actually happening. Or we're going to, at some point, realize that only Regan is seeing, like, all this stuff that is damaged or turned off or whatever, and anyone else did not see any of this. That'd be kind of the interesting kind of thing to discuss. So, with that said, let's go out of our way to say it's about that time yet again to just go into spoiler territory about this film. Let's go out of our way to say it's that double 5 time territory. And let's go into this thing called spoiler time, spoiler time. It's about that time you get to spoil this movie. I think the one thing that I saw before this, when it roughly came out, before before I got to see Birdman, would probably have to be the one snowman movie called Jack Frost that Michael Keaton was in, where Michael Keaton went on and was to eventually die in that film and be reincarnated as this snowman. Spoilers for anybody that hasn't seen the non-horror film Jack Frost. The horror film Jack Frost is actually pretty interesting, but doesn't have Michael Keaton in it. Uh, so, but yeah. So, anyways, so going into this film, in the very beginning of it, we have Riggin kind of waking up for the day, and we find out that he's basically like waking up in his theater. Is going on and like slapping on some clothes, and uh, all of a sudden he's just kind of using his power to kind of like to rise a little bit. So we of course go on and we have like Riggin be told, it's like, well, hey man, like you have a meeting coming up, or you have like some kind of practice to go on to, like, come on, like, you're late. So Riggin of course goes on and he is making his way to the scene that's already in progress, this like practice. So it's kind of interesting because I had taken like, I don't want to say acting classes, but like some high school acting stuff. And it's kind of interesting when they go on and tell you like the stage setup, where it's like stage left and stage right and center stage and all this kind of goofiness. And like it seems like stage stuff technically has its own lingo at some points, but like eventually it got to where like I ended up being like just some extra guy in some production, and that was kind of fun. But when really looking at it, it was like, man, I wish that I could have gone on and like been like something important at some point. Um, but like everybody has that aspiration or that dream or that like just wanting to eventually be a much more important person than where you really get placed. Because it's like you have to build up to those XYZ roles and whatever. So we have Riggin that sits down and he all of a sudden is getting in the scene. And we, of course, have Ralph here who's going on and talking to Leslie and Laura and kind of talking about killing her. Talking about some dark stuff. So we of course have Riggin, who is kind of correcting this guy's performance, where Riggin is asking Ralph here, like, Ralph, can you give me a performance that seems like you're more like scared? Like, can you like give me like, because this is what like really needs for this dialogue. And so Ralph goes on and is trying to sound more scared. He's like, oh my god. So all of a sudden we have this light that goes on and falls on Ralph's head and stops his performance. And then so Riggin goes on and talks to Jake, who is Zach Galifianakis. And so Riggin is telling Jake, it's like, you know what, we desperately need to just replace that guy. Like, that guy is a horrible actor. And so we just need to get somebody else. And so they're starting to like rattle off all these names, like these high-end actors. I'm like, like, man, can they get some real like big names? And so like they're mentioning like Jeremy Renner, and immediately we have Jake who's saying it's like, well, he's doing Avengers right now, and Riggins is like, wait a minute, they gave him a cape, really? Man, they're giving everybody capes right now, and so Regan goes on and he slams the door, realizing, who can we get? So Regan is going on, and we of course have it where Birdman is whispering sweet nothings into Birdman's mind, and going on and realizing that it's like, yeah, all these guys are just jokes. It's like, why can't we get back out there and give them one more time and one more try? Saying that guys like Robert Downey Jr., like we're better than him. So we have Riggin go on, and so Riggin is trying to like mentally like figure out how to like talk to himself to just kind of release the Birdman, to have Birdman stop talking in his head. Just kind of figure out how to just like just like release the anger, release the like just trying to find some like meditative like way of just kind of getting this thing out of course Riggins' head. So we further go on, and so we have a moment where Leslie is to eventually come up with an idea. Leslie is to go on and know a guy named Michael or Mike. And so that eventually just so happens to be Edward Norton's character. And really, they're just like, really? Do you really know Mike? And they're like, and she's like, yeah, it's like we share like a vag. And it's like, oh, okay. Like, so like immediately they're like scrambling, so like, oh my god, if we can get this guy, like this is gonna like we're gonna really like do really well here. So they're calling Mike, they're getting him down here, and so we find out from Laura, because Regan is pulling Laura aside and telling him at one point that she has missed 2 periods and that she thinks that she's possibly pregnant. And so she's desperately telling Regan, it's like, what do you feel about that? And Regan's just like, because Regan already has a kid named Sam, who's technically his assistant. In the beginning of the film, we of course have a Regan, after he is to kind of get up, he all of a sudden has had this like Skype call with Sam, and Sam's asking him like, hey, what flowers do you want? And Regan is like, well, I want this kind. And so when Regan is to come back to his room, of course we have it to where Sam gives him the wrong flowers, because she's like, yeah, they were all out of the ones that you wanted. Like, yeah, I'd probably just give him anything anyways. So Regan and Laura, like, we go on and we have these two, and like they're hugging, and like I think Regan is just kind of at like a state of shock, because we have Regan who's like desperately trying to put money together to be able to afford Mike's character. He's going on and like and is trying to think out financially how he can go on and afford this guy. So we have it at one point where Regan is going on and talking to his to I want to say his wife. Or no, I want to say his like ex-wife, Sylvia. And so Regan is saying to Sylvia, it's like, well, we're probably going to have to like refinance the house, and we're probably going to have to do a number of things to just kind of figure some way out to kind of do like the money for Mike to just kind of get things together. So We also have Ralph that is thinking that he's possibly going to sue this theater for his injuries, because we find out way later that he's actually in a wheelchair. And he's made his way to this theater while, of course, Regan is kind of in mid performance. And he's going on like, seriously, you're in a wheelchair? And like the guy is like in this like he's in this neck thing, and he's in a wheelchair, like all bandaged up. So, but that's later on, and we'll hopefully talk about that at some point. So we of course have Mike that is to go on and show up. And so Mike goes on, and it seems like he is to be like quick at memorization, like crazy, like quick at memorization. And so when Mike arrives at this place, we of course go on and have both Mike and Regan, who are kind of like going at the lines. And so Regan is just like, well, hey, like, where's your book? And Mike is like, I don't need the book. Just hit me with something. Just give me some kind of just give me some kind of line, and like I'll give you the performance. So Regan goes on, and he's like looking at the book, and like Mike is just like, you know what, like, you don't go off book. I'll go off book, you go off book, let's go. Like, come up with something. So Regan is going on and talking about that you don't know the person, like you don't know them in particular, and that it, like, he keeps going on and saying that like you don't know this person. And so Mike goes on, and he mentions is like, well, like he mentions about love, and like you don't know what love is, and so on and so forth. And so all of a sudden Mike gives this critique with Regan where like the lines are far too much. There's a lot of lines here about Regan not knowing this one person. And so Mike is like, you know what? Could you kind of cut this or skim this down? Like, there's too many lines here of you just telling me like 4 different ways that you don't know this or I don't know this person. So just kind of give me with one, and I'll kind of like go on from there. Like, and so we just have Mike that is kind of critiquing every little thing, and it's so fascinating. So we push us on to also having Mike kind of complimenting Sam on her rear end at some point. And like we start having Mike getting introduced to a number of people, as well as Mike having to kind of quickly go into a fitting where, of course, we have it where Leslie is to re-meet up with Mike, and like, oh, I guess like you're gonna immediately just go without your clothes, because I guess Mike doesn't wear underwear, so he's like basically nothing on, just kind of like twig and berries into the wind, so to speak. So all of a sudden we have Sam, who is to kind of notice that Mike is just be like have nothing on. So we have this tailor that's going on, and like, yeah, I think we're gonna have to go and do this, and we're gonna have to go and do that, and also get this guy a set of underwear. So Leslie is going on and mentioning to Mike, it's like, hey, you should probably put something on, because like Sam is all around here, and she'll probably be looking you up and down. And Mike is telling Leslie, it's like, well, Sam is already there. Sam is to walk off hearing the insults of Leslie, and Leslie is like, really, Mike? You couldn't have given me a heads up? Like, you couldn't have gone on and not humiliated me. Like, do you have to go on and find every single way to figure out a way to humiliate me? Because I think Mike kind of weirdly or secretly gets his rocks off by doing that. So, so we go on and we have a preview that, of course, is to be previewed by me now. So, of course, the exact same scene, the exact same set piece that we, of course, see between the Mike and the Riggin piece. Like, I want to call Mike Michael because I think his name is to be Michael in this movie, and I don't know why IMDb calls him Mike. I don't know why. Let me know in the comments below if it is Mike or Michael, because maybe you watched the movie. Because I think his last name is like Shiner or Shining or something. It's weird. So we go on in this film, and so we have this preview where, of course, we have Regan who goes on and is to have this kind of solo speech where he kind of comes in and he goes on to this story and has this kind of limelight, and he talks about this like heartbreaking story about him being a doctor and him trying to like keep these people alive, and all of a sudden we end up having Mike who wrecks this story by having him mention that the alcohol that he was supposed to have is just water, like the vodka is just water, and nothing is really honest and nothing is really true about any parts of this stage. To all of a sudden, we have it where Mike has to slam this one drawer, and the whole drawer falls out with all these dishes inside of it, and he's like, whoops. So all of a sudden, Reagan is to realize that Mike is to completely destroy this preview, to where, of course, Reagan goes on and is just kind of walk off and tell Jake to go on and just kind of like close it for tonight, and to possibly fire Mike because he's being too difficult to work with. And Jake is like, no, like, you're a director, direct him, figure out a way, because this guy, like, immediately when this guy was to be hired on here and was to be told that he was working with us, like, the ticket sales doubled. So, like, you're a director, figure out a way to, like, figure this guy out. Figure out a way to, like, get him to do what you need him to do. So, Regan goes on and he, like, starts to spend some time with Mike at points in the story. And Mike starts going on and spending some time with Sam. Consistently going out to some, like, rooftop with Sam. And the first time around, we, of course, have it where, like, Sam keeps, like, sitting next to this ledge, and we have one guy who's like, hey, jump! She's like, eat me! So, we have Mike and we have Sam playing Truth or Dare with one another. And Sam goes on, it's like, well, hey, like, did you really think that I had a nice butt? And Mike is just like, well, yeah. So, and that this guy likes to be very forward with people and so on and so forth. And so Mike, every time they do Truth or Dare, like, he keeps picking Truth. But then when someone else comes up, he's like, hey, you're picking Truth, really? To where, of course, Sam is forced to pick Dare, and so she spits them on somebody that's kind of walking by. So Mike picks truth again, and Sam, of course, is saying it's like, well, like, would you ever like sleep with me? And Mike is just like, well, like I figure I probably couldn't get it up. And so Sam leaves. So it seems like both of them are going to be romantically tangled together, but we never really do much with that in this film. We don't really push that this much. But it also seems there's an easy way for Riggin to just kind of have more, like, be more angry or upset against Mike in this production. So we have moments where after these previews and after these practices and after these things, we of course go on and have it where we have this one scene that's kind of towards the tail end of this story where both Leslie and both Mike are in bed together. And we have it where Mike is like, hey man, I'm actually hard like in this scene with you right now. Like, how about we actually play it up? Like, how about we actually go at it? Like, wouldn't that be great? Wouldn't that be hot? So Mike is consistently pushing this, and Leslie wants nothing to do with it. To where all of a sudden we have Riggin who walks into this scene with two of them going, or like almost trying to go at it, and then all of a sudden we have, of course, the two get out of this bed, realizing that Riggin, like, the jig is up. And so we go on into this performance and we kind of see Mike just standing up, like, fully, like, some tent action is going on. So we have Riggin who smacks Michael and knocks him down, fully tented. And everybody just has a real good laugh. And so we have Riggin who's just kind of very distraught about this affair, and then he goes on and he, of course, shoots himself, and he falls over and dies. So we, of course, have it that after this performance, Mike is to desperately try to run after Leslie, just like, hey, like, can we be professionals about this? Can we, like, Leslie's like, no, like, you tried to take advantage of me. So we, of course, have Leslie and Laura just kind of talking things out, and Laura tries to make Leslie a little bit more calm, and they also kiss. So Riggin comes in and tells Leslie, it's like, hey, like, you're very talented, and I'm so glad that I have you here. And so it's like, hey, like, you're really good at what you do, and don't get, like, scared away or pushed away from what's going on here. So we, of course, have both Riggin and we have both Mike, who, of course, are going on and spending some time together. So Riggin, of course, is to go with Mike to just kind of share a thing of coffee. And we have Riggin tell this story to Mike about how, like, this whole thing about Riggin started was over just some cocktail napkin where this guy gave him some praise about his performance, and Mike is to go on and say it's like, well, hey, like, he gave you a cocktail napkin, like, this means nothing because he was just drunk, like, praising you, and he probably didn't even know who you were because he was probably so drunk. And so that must mean nothing to you. Like, we also had it where, like, Mike was criticizing Riggin for the stage gun that he had, because it had a little red dot at the end of it, and Mike couldn't take that seriously when he was holding that gun to him. And it's like, hey, like, paint over it, fix it, do something. Like, I can't take it seriously. So, but we had Regan, we had Mike, who in this bar is to realize that there is some reviewer, some critic. You spot her right away, and they're like, like, yeah, like, that is the one girl that we absolutely need to impress here. And we're hoping that that one girl is going to give us a good review, and we're going to be freaking made. So we go on later in the film, and so Regan is gonna try to give this woman, this critic, this drink, this cocktail. So this reviewer is talking to Regan and saying, like, you know what, I'm gonna bury your review, or I'm gonna bury your play. Whatever it is, like, I'm gonna say the worst possible things about it, because I want to just bury your play. And Regan is just like, well, why? The critic is going on and mentioning, it's like, well, because you, of course, were some superhero success, comic booky, whatever actor from before, and you're just wanting to just come in here and put on anything and kind of immediately think that you're going to turn around and have this big, huge success. No. Like, this girl is going to drive this theater to the ground because of this guy just kind of encroaching upon this world. And so we, of course, have Regan realize that this girl is already writing a review. And he starts critiquing this girl's review on something that he doesn't even know about. And so he's kind of looking through this whole thing and kind of narrowing it down. And he realizes that every single thing is some kind of label for something. Like, hey, you're just labelizing something, or you're just kind of like, doesn't really feel like you really saw this. There's not really anything there. Like, it feels like you're just going on and just, like, you didn't even watch the show whatsoever, kind of thing. And I usually paraphrase, and I go out of my way to, at some points, try to give you a skewed version of the movie, or a skewed version of the show, or I try to make jokes and whatever. So, like, I feel like not everything is always going to be perfect, but hey, watch the movie, watch the show yourself, have your own way of having to go on and talk about every single second of every single part of a movie, and try to figure out how in detail you can memorize the whole ordeal. So Regan goes on, and so he kind of balls this review up and tosses it back at her. It's like, you know what, like, whatever you're gonna do, fine. Like, because he just kind of belittles her anyways and just kind of walks off. So we have Regan, of course, walk away. So more performances, of course, are to be afoot going on in this story. And so we have at one point through some of these performances, we, of course, have Regan's wife that, of course, is to show herself to help out Regan as kind of a moral support thing. Because Sylvia is to know how important these kind of things are to Regan, and so he wants to help her out. She wants to help him out, just to kind of to feel good, to know somebody's out there in the audience. So we, of course, go on and have Regan kind of talking to Sylvia and kind of mentioning, like, what is going on next, but also kind of talking about their past, kind of talking about that he kind of wished that he could have possibly been there to be a part of his own daughter's birth. or at least that he wishes that there was somehow like a recording of it. So like, but he really just wanted to be there because he feels like Riggin feels like he's missed out on so much. And so we also had this later story when Riggin is to talk to Sylvia, and when Riggin and Sylvia were having problems, we had Riggin who just went out in the water and he tried to drown himself. And all of a sudden he ended up finding out that there was just a bunch of jellyfish who all started to attack him at one time. And all of a sudden, like, he's like fighting for his life from all of these jellyfish. And Sylvia's like, oh, well, I thought you had gotten like tanned or burned, like a sunburn. And that's what Riggin was to say it was, but actually that's not really the truth. So we go on into this story, and like I'm kind of bouncing all over the place, but it is what it is with these reviews. So we start to go on and have, like, after all these previews, they start to go on and actually like bust out the play, and it's usually kind of the same scenes over and over and over again, but they're kind of done differently at some points for whatever reasons. So we have at one point where Riggin is starting to realize that Sam and Michael are seemingly going to be a couple. It seems like they're kissing backstage. So Riggin, of course, is going on and wanting to get a cigarette from some guy. And so he goes and opens his door, tries to get a cigarette. All of a sudden, he locks himself out, and his robe is caught in this door. So now he has to run through this whole street with this like parade going on and everything like that. We have Riggin going on, and he's running back into the very front of the stage, just underwear and nothing else. He's running back in there, having, of course, Ralph, who is like, hey man, like, I'm here to go on and try to sue you guys. And Riggin is just like, well, we'll get to that. And Jake eventually is to get a phone call about this whole ordeal, and he's trying to like prevent these guys from hanging up on him. So Riggin goes, and luckily he has his wig. And so we have it to where it's the perfect performance, and of course Riggin is coming in on cue with his wig on. And so he's kind of walking in, and he's like, knock, knock! So he goes in there and does his lines, and all of a sudden we have a stagehand, I think it's Jake, who hands him over this gun. And so we have him do the scene again, but from this like different perspective. And I'm like, yeah, like, you have it where, like, I guess lucky that he like perfectly timed it and whatever. So yeah, like, that was such like an interesting, like, because I'm sure that happens to any number of characters, like the worst case scenario kind of thing in stories where you're going on and having a character that is just kind of like out of their element because they're like, oh, like, I have to go on and do this and like hope for the best. So for this story, we of course have Mike and Sam, who have another moment on the rooftop, and they're kind of talking about things, kind of talking about their pasts, where, of course, we had Mike, who's to mention that he wants to rip out the eyeballs of Sam so he can go on and see this city through like Sam's eyes, like cannot really be fully known, or maybe be a little bit more ignorant about like what he like was to see when Mike was Sam's age. So that's kind of a weird, goofy thing there. So, and we have both Sam and Mike who kiss, and so it seems like this relationship is going somewhere. We also have the moment where Regan is to find out that Jake is to say there was an ordering of this tanning booth, or this tanning bed for Mike in this movie. And so Regan goes on and is to find Mike, because Regan is to find out that Mike had put this story in the newspaper and used the exact same story that Regan had, like word for word. And Regan goes and confronts him about it. It's like, well, hey, like, you're reusing other people's stories. Like, you're reusing my story. And Mike is like, well, hey, like, they caught me off guard and I needed something to tell them. And, like, I don't know, like, I just, whatever came and popped into my brain was something that and so this just leads to both Mike and Regan just going into a slugging match. Because Regan is like, you know what, I'm like, you know what, you were talking about your dad, and he was like an alcoholic. It's like, well, mine too. And so all of a sudden Regan goes into this story about how his father would go on and like beat him and take him to this woodshed and like take off his belt and like all this stuff. And the Mike is like, oh my god, well, I didn't know, like, I'm sorry. And so Regan goes on and he's looking at him like, aha, like who could be real now? And so this just leads to have Regan like punch Mike in the face, and just leads out to this brawl where it seems that Mike is mentioning like, hey, uh like you're not gonna fire me, uh like I'm gonna bury you if you fire me, and this and that. So we had this like fight out, we had this brawl. And so the further and further we go into this film, the more Regan is getting like Birdman to just whisper in his brain, to the point where Regan is going on and just kind of walking the streets, and all of a sudden like Birdman is right behind him, consistently whispering sweet nothings, telling Birdman it's like, hey, we need to get back to the action, because that's what really people wants, or that's what everybody really wants. All of a sudden we have this war breaking out. Everybody's like firing bullets and guns and whatever. There's this big massive robotic bird that's coming on and destroying the world, and Birdman is like flying around, and he's like, So we get to the point where Regan is feeling just so low that Regan at one point is going on and like being at the top of this building, and he all of a sudden is just flying throughout the town. He's just flying all over. And I'm just like, okay, this is a little weird. So Regan is just flying all over town after this guy was to go on and try to like get him off this ledge. And so Regan's like, you know what I'm going to do? And he like jumps off, and all of a sudden he starts just flying all over town. We just see this like this scene of him just flying everywhere. So I know that there's a million bajillion things that I'm just kind of jumbling all over the place, but I'm trying to get just there's a jumbled mess of everything. Let's watch the film. So, and I'm trying to think if there's anything left in also the brain of my mind that I had forgotten at some point. We had the one woman that was in the bar who was going on and trying to take a picture of course, Birdman. And we had one kid who's like, who's this guy? And the mom is just like, he used to be Birdman. It's, so they both walk away, and like Regan is just like, really, like I'm just still like living in that past, living in that bubble. We also had one point where Birdman was taking a dump, while of course Birdman was trying to like clean his face, just kind of clean himself up, and Birdman was just taking a dump, looking at him like, hmm. So we have Regan use his psychic abilities through this film. He goes on and he like turns this radio off. He goes on and like destroys some things with his abilities. He goes and completely wrecks his room, uh, just taking every single like item and just tossing it around and breaking it. Every big item he could find, he's just taking it and breaking it. So we have at one point where, of course, Regan is finally telling Jake that he's like, you know what, I'm burnt out. Like, I'm so tired. Like, and I'm like, well, dude, out of all the stuff that you just wrecked, I'm sure you're exhausted. And so we have Regan who's telling Jake that he's like, I'm tired. Like, I'm done. Like, I can't do this anymore. And Jake is like, well, wait a minute. Like, and he's like, I think we got to cancel tonight. And Jake is like, no, like, we can't, like, you can't cancel. Like, everybody in the Brother is coming. Like, all these big, lavish celebrities, they're all coming to see you. And, like, Jake is, like, building this up to an absurd level where it doesn't make sense for all these people to possibly be coming. And so he walks off to have both Laura and both Leslie going on and like asking after Regan. It's like, is he okay? Like he's very wounded. So we have Leslie that is asking Jake, is all this stuff like true that Jake has to say about all these lavish celebrities that are desperately like Martin Scorsese and all of this stuff? And Jake is like, yeah, and the new Pope is also coming too. Like Jake has just kind of figured out the magic words to just say here. So Jake leaves, and they're just like, well, like, just promise whatever you can to just keep people working. So we go on further to the end of this film, because roughly we are there. I think there's probably a number of things that I could probably go on and still probably talk about in this film, because it feels like there's probably a number of billion things. Like we also had the one moment where Regan is to just feel so down on himself that he goes, after going to, I think, talk to the critic, he goes on to buy this whiskey bottle and drinks it right out of this bag. And he gets so drunk that he passes out, and he's just on the side of the street. And I think that's where we get like right into the whole scene where Birdman is kind of whispering sweet nothings into his own mind, his own ear, his own whatever. So, and hopefully I've technically covered almost everything at this point. So, we even have at one point, it's not even a word. We also had the one point where Regan was getting that whiskey, and the one guy was like yelling absurdities. And then so when Regan is to finally get to that guy, and it's yelling these absurdities, he's just like, hey man, like I just wanted to give you range. Wouldn't that be an interesting story if all of a sudden Regan is just like his brain is just so fried that every single person he's to see in this world is all of a sudden just like hey man, how was that performance? Like every single person would just stop and just like, hey man, like how was I doing? Like how was I being as far as this hobo is? Wouldn't that be fascinating? Wouldn't that be interesting? So we have Sam consistently telling Riggin that all these things are all these big, massive viral hits, and that we had like Riggin kind of running through the streets, like is getting this big, massive, these big, massive views, and Riggin's like, oh, okay, great, whatever that means. Like maybe that'll mean we'll get some more butts and seats. So towards the end of this last performance, we have Riggin go on, and he goes and pulls this other gun out than we've normally seen. So Riggin goes off and is to get his cue, open this door, and is to again confront his lover and and Mike, and then go on and then shoot himself at the very end of this play. This time around, we find out that I guess it was a real bullet by accident or on purpose. And we find out that Riggin is to shoot his own nose off. So Riggin goes to the hospital and gets a brand new nose. And so all of a sudden, everybody is like desperately clamoring for the critique of this play, just saying like, "Oh my God, this thing is amazing!" It's like we have a guy that is to shed blood, figuratively and literally, for this play, and like, so all of a sudden they're realizing like, man, this is gonna be like the biggest thing since sliced bread, and like, oh my God, like this is. I'm like, what are they gonna do? Like, try to like repeat this performance? I don't think so. Like, that's a little crazy. So Jake is telling Riggin, it's like, well, hey, like, let's just figure out a way to just say that this was not a real gun, that you couldn't tell the difference, that there was accidental discharge and whatever, and mistakes happen. And so they're trying to like push it under the rug. So Riggin, of course, is to get this brand new nose, and Jake is saying like, hey, like if anybody's gonna come in here and like we can give like whoever was working on Meg Ryan, we can go on and give him that nose or whatever. So we also had the moment where Riggin was talking to Sylvia early in the movie, and Riggin was talking about how he was on this flight with George Clooney, which is kind of funny to kind of think about. And so Riggin was going on and saying that immediately, like, this plane was having problems, like things were buckling, they were getting scared. So Riggin, of course, is to realize that if he would have died and that plane would have crashed, that the only real thing that would have been the most important thing would be that George Clooney was to die on that plane, and that Riggin was just this forgotten person, or maybe had like a little bit of like a smaller detail that, oh yeah, this guy died too, but George Clooney would have been like the front page, front line thing, sadly enough. Because, of course, I think Riggin is to mention that supposedly Michael Jackson and Farrah Fawcett, I think, had died on the same day. He's like, isn't that interesting how probably everybody was so focused on Michael Jackson and nobody really cared about Farrah Fawcett? So Sylvia was to say to Riggin and tell him, it's like, well, you're no Farrah Fawcett. It's just like kind of dwindling this guy down more. So at the end of this film, we of course have Riggin with this big, massive like thing upon his face, this big bandage, Sam is going on and taking a picture of Riggin in this bandage, going on and saying that it's like, yeah, I'm gonna tell all of your followers, scare all of them, and so Riggin is telling Sam, it's like, hey, I have followers, and she's like, yeah, you have a lot of them, so I'm gonna scare all of them. So after everyone leaves, Riggin is to go into the bathroom, is to take all of his bandages off and see his new nose. So Riggin goes on and he walks to his window and he is to go to his window and he's to jump out. Sam goes on and makes her way back into this hospital room to realize that his father is gone. Probably should have naturally just assumed that he probably left the room somewhere. But Sam instead goes and looks out this window to just kind of see if her father had done himself in. And she's kind of looking everywhere, looking into the skies, and she all of a sudden realized that he might have flown away. It's like, okay. So I don't think there's going to be a Birdman 2. Probably wouldn't make sense. So with that said, I think I'm going to get out of here. Let me know in the comments below. I'm sure that there was something that I probably forgotten during this film. Let me know anything about the Birdman or whichever that you want to go on and talk about. Some people might have been disappointed about this film. Some people might have loved this film. Like, I just feel very middle of the road about it. I would love to just go on and be like, yeah, like I'm gushing about this film. Just because of kind of what came out after Michael Keaton was kind of going back into like doing a number of things. Like this one just kind of like feels like a quickly forgotten thing in all honesty. It kind of feels like was more like bigger things that he went on to do, which is kind of hard because this movie was like really like for that time people were just like, oh my god, Michael Keaton, and they were just so excited. And I think probably at the time after I watched this movie, I'm like, yeah, like they hits really good. Even though it was kind of like something like unexpected that I was kind of being delivered in this film. Like I thought it was so intriguing during the time it came out. So with that said, I'm gonna get out of here. Bye, everybody. Bye, everybody. Like it is kind of funny that we went on and had like Michael Keaton be Birdman, but of course we know him eventually becoming the Vulture. I think that's kind of hilarious. It's like, yeah, like we went on and had this guy be a Birdman to eventually go on and be another bird. Like just like, hey everybody, I'm sure there was like so many Birdman jokes. Freaking like, yeah, I guess he's gonna be this like this typecasted guy that he's gonna consistently be these bird characters for the rest of his life. And recently I just got on and seen like Guardian of Justice, that show. I'm like, oh my god, like just thinking about it afterwards, I'm like, technically the guy who is the Batman of that world was like this bird character. And so DDP or Diamond Dallas Page was technically playing Birdman. So yeah, I just kind of like just that popped into there. So with that said, I'm gonna get out of here. Goodbye, everybody. Bye, everybody.